But from 1951 to 1959, China was exerting its control, more and more control into Tibetan lives, and Tibetan couldn't bear it anymore. So in 59, there was the uprising, the first Tibetan uprising that happened in Tibet. And from that uprising, His Holiness had to leave, and along with His Holiness, about 10 to 20,000 Tibetans left in 1959. So the question now is why China invaded Tibet in 1949? If Tibet was a free country, why China would want to invade Tibet, come into Tibet? There are a few reasons, and first of all, simply because China could. Tibet had no military of its own that would be able to defend Tibet, and secondly, Tibet, if you look at the geographic of Tibet, it's placed in a very strategic area. If China would have control over Tibet, then they would be able to exert influence or expand their reach to different countries, and wanted to expand communism. So that was one reason why they came into Tibet, to basically expand communism. So these were the general reason why Tibet was occupied. And then the next question would be, why invasion was possible in Tibet? Tibet was a Buddhist country, and since 13th century was ruled by Buddhist head figures, and we did not pay much attention to army, most of all, and defense of the borders. So it was very easy for China to come and invade Tibet. There were about 5,000 Tibetan troops when Chinese came with the 50,000 PLA modern troops. So Tibet was very easy for China to occupy. So what happened after Tibet was occupied in 1959, after the Dalai Lama left? First thing, there was the major uprising in Tibet against Chinese occupation. To suppress that, so many Tibetans were killed. On March 10th alone, on March 17th alone, on the day when His Holiness left, almost 10,000 Tibetans got killed in the capital city, and many were being killed everywhere in Tibet. And from that time on, so many Tibetans were sent into prison, labor camps in Tibet. Even my grandfather died in China from labor camp, from hunger. And after that, the Chinese policy, Mao's policy of Great Leap Forward, came into existence, and that was all over China, but it was more severe in Tibet, because we are so different country. And Great Leap Forward, and after that, the devastating Cultural Revolution came. And through that, from 1959, in the span of less than 20 years, more than 1 million Tibetan lives were lost, and 6,000 monasteries and cultural institutions were destroyed. So Tibetan culture and people were basically being destroyed, and His Holiness even right now says that Tibetan culture is, there's a cultural genocide in Tibet, even though people are not getting killed like they were in 50s. So currently, the state of Tibet, from 1980, in 1980, after Deng Xiaoping came into power, whole China was open, and Tibet was open as well. Tourists were able to go to Tibet, and a lot of Tibetans who came into exile were able to go back to Tibet and meet their relatives who were left there. So from 1980 to 1987, there was a relaxed policy from China. They were sort of confident that they had really good grab over Tibetans, but they were proved wrong, because when Tibetans got a little bit of freedom, they went back to the old way. They were practicing their own religion, they were practicing their own culture, they were celebrating Tibetan New Year, which was banned for the last 20 years. And there were pictures of His Holiness everywhere in 1980s in Tibet. In 1987, with that, a protest happened, a major protest. and protests started to happen from 1987, 88, 1991, 92. So protests kept happening, and China realized that they have to do something. So repression was their answer. They repressed Tibet so hard that right now, if you have a picture of His Holiness in Tibet, you'll go to jail. If you go to school, or if you work at a government-affiliated offices, you cannot go to monastery. You cannot even have a rosary, a Tibetan symbol. So these sort of restrictions happen, and Hu Jintao described it as a grabs with both hands, meaning with one hand they will spend a lot of money into Tibet and develop Tibet, but on the other hand they will repress Tibetans of its identity. Basically, they're trying to develop the area of Tibet and make Tibet into a place where lots of Han Chinese would come and settle there, and basically Tibetans would be more or less a museum object and become Tibetans. The 6 million Tibetans would be assimilated into 1.2 billion Chinese. So that was their policy. Now, even when we talk about spending a lot of money in Tibet, most of the money right now, last year or 2 years ago, the railway was built, and from that, a lot of Chinese migrants could come to Tibet, and at the same time, so many resources could be taken back into China. So that sort of policy is happening in Tibet. And on the other hand, there's a Tibetan government in exile here, and His Holiness, as the head of it, was trying to negotiate with China in a peaceful way. And we all believe that that's the only way to solve the Tibetan issue. But China don't agree with us, because they don't even consider that there is an issue called Tibet. And in 1980, Deng Xiaoping said, we will talk about anything else if you just forget about independence of Tibet. So His Holiness said, okay, we'll do that. In 1988, he said, he made a 5-point peace proposal saying that we will not ask for independence if we can have real autonomy in Tibet, where we'll be able to preserve our culture, we'll be able to preserve our language and the Tibetan identity, and more than anything, develop Tibet from a Tibetan perspective, not from an enforced Chinese perspective. So these were the demands that His Holiness and the Tibetan exile government is making so far. And up till now, there have been 6 rounds of talks from 2007, 2001, and these talks have not yielded any results. And these were basically talking about talks that would happen in the future. And so now we come to the point of 2008, when this national uprising, another second Tibetan national uprising happened from March 10th. And basically, Tibetan people's aspiration is that we'll be able to live in our country, raise our own kids, and preserve our own culture. That's our aspiration. And if you ask any Tibetan whether they want independence or not, they'll say yes, we want independence. But at the same time, Tibetans are realistic, looking at the Chinese situation, international situation, and we are asking for autonomy to preserve our own culture and identity. And that's the basically short summary of Tibetan history. Okay, thank you.